So what we've got here on the bench today is a cracked digitizer on an iPhone 4S, and as always buy the actual digitizer and LCD together with these. You will save no money buying them separately and trying to glue them on yourself at home. You just cause yourself a world of pain and you'll end up spending more money. So have a look around. Amazon tends to be the best place to get these screens, I find, so have a look on there. I'll put a link down below to a couple of sellers that I use as well. So first of all, get a piece of A4 paper and get a pen and draw around your iPhone a couple of times on the paper, and you can put in a couple of lines just to denote where the top and the bottom is. And then what we can do is put this to one side and we can place the screws where we actually take them out of the iPhone, and if we place them on these little templates then we'll know where they actually go back, because there's not that many screws to take apart one of these, but there are different sizes, and if you haven't done one before you will forget where they go. So that's the best way I've found to actually remember where all the screws go. So before you start removing any screws, remove the SIM card. If you don't get one of these little tools in your kit that you get with your replacement screen, just use a paper clip to actually remove that. And now we'll start by removing the two bottom screws next to the power connector. So with the two screws removed, we should be able to slide the back off. So I want to start by removing the battery first, and the battery connector is held in place by these two Phillips screws and this metal shield. So now that we've removed the two Phillips screws, we're going to pop off this connector for the power from the battery, but also take note of this little spring mechanism here that normally flies off as soon as you disconnect this connector. It's kind of sandwiched in between, and the same Phillips screw here holds that in place. But a lot of people often lose this, and some shops that don't actually charge a lot of money to do these kind of repairs, I will guarantee that most of the time that isn't put back in place either. So just work yourself around this connector and pop it off. Just fold it back over there, and now we can remove that little spring and put that to one side to replace later. So to remove the battery, you want to get a plastic spudger again and come in from this side here and get my hook underneath, and all I'm doing is putting a little bit of pressure on. You will feel and you will actually hear as well the double-sided tape actually coming away really slowly. That holds the battery in place, so you just take your time, just a little bit of pressure at a time, because you don't want to damage this lithium battery. So a little bit of pressure, just keep working it, and eventually the double-sided tape will come away. So set the battery to one side. So next we're going to remove these two Phillips screws that are holding this shield in place. We can pop this connector off. Gently peel, fold that back. So next I want to pop this high rose connector here. Just get a plastic tool, try to get in underneath it and just pop it up. Like so. And we'll feed it back through under its little hook there. So now we can remove the Phillips screws from here and here that are holding this speaker assembly in place. And this screw actually comes away with this little plastic wedge. So now we can gently pry the speaker assembly out. And now we can start and remove the motherboard itself by removing the actual screws that you can see. And also this one is not a Phillips, you'll need a flathead, small flathead screwdriver to remove that one. So again, place the screws on your piece of paper so you know where they're going to go back. So carry on with these Phillips screws here, and also be really careful as well, these are different lengths, and we can remove this shield then to get to the ribbon cables underneath. So now we've got those 4 Phillips screws removed, we can gently tease off this shield, and just here there's a little hook that goes underneath, so it's better to wiggle it from all different directions and get those 2 tabs out, and then it should come away. As you can see there's that little hook. So now we've got our ribbon cable tabs here, and pop them off. And make sure you do all this when you're disconnecting these tabs with a plastic pry tool. You don't want to be using a metal screwdriver. We can pop our camera out and put that to one side. So now I want to remove these 2 Phillips screws here. There's a little metal retaining clip that I want to pop out. Again, just ease it out with a plastic spudger. And pop off the LCD ribbon cable connectors. So there is one last connector that we need to pop off. It's quite a tight one, it's a high rose connector again. Just get your spudger underneath and pop it off. And lastly, just under this black tape here, there's a small Phillips screw that we need to remove. And then we can actually remove the motherboard itself. Just again, be careful not to rip any of the ribbon cables. So now that I've got the motherboard removed, I want to go around the unit now and remove all the Phillips screws. And you've got on the sides here, you've got 6, 3 on this side, Phillips screws with some little riser washers. Same on that side, 3 again. And you've got little Phillips screws in each corner. This one's also covered with a little bit of tape, so you have to peel that back. And try to keep them with a little washer still attached. It just makes it a lot easier, especially when putting them back together later. And then you've got no fear of losing the little washer. And for the final screw here on the side, it's partially blocked by the vibrate here, so some people push that out of the way, but I like to completely remove it. Just get a flat blade and gently ease it off there. It's only held on by some double-sided tape. We can put that to one side and we can just stick it back down at the end when we come to fit everything back together again, just by using the same tape. There's plenty of sticky on there. I can get the final screw. So now the 4 Phillips screws in the corners. For that final one, just tease that black tape to one side so you can get in with your screwdriver. There's no need to completely remove it. So now we're ready to actually remove the broken LCD, and you'll see some people using heat. There's no need to use heat with one of these. You get your plastic pry tool, try and find it, get it into one of the corners, and then you can work it along and it will slowly lift from the chassis. So here is our new LCD next to our old one, and there's a couple of things we're going to have to remove off the old one. Is the home button, of course. We're going to have to transplant that over. Also this little plastic flange that goes around the front facing camera, we need to remove that and stick it in place onto our new LCD. And also the mesh that goes across the actual earpiece of the phone, we're going to have to transplant that over to our new LCD. Sometimes, depends, different sellers sell them and they've already got this in place, and I've also seen sellers that also have the plastic flange in place as well. We'll start by removing the home button first, so if you get your finger on the underside and gently push it up, you can see that rubber membrane stretching, slowly coming away. Pull that away. We'll give that a bit of a clean before we stick it back down onto our new screen. So as for this little plastic ring, use a sharp knife and gently try and pry it off. And same with this black mesh. And then to stick the home button back on, rest it on one of your fingers, make sure you got the square in vertical position. When you're happy with it, flip it over and then gently work that membrane back into place. And the little trick for holding the plastic flange in place is a couple of dabs with the glue stick. And you can do the same thing with the speaker headphone membrane. So something you want to be really careful of is when you feed these ribbon cables together, try not to get it hooked up on this back ribbon cable here. They all want to be that same length when they're fed through. A lot of sellers will actually say in their description that if you're returning one because it's faulty, they will check the ribbon cables themselves to make sure you haven't caught them on the side of the chassis here and you have fed it through correctly. It's one of the big things that a mistake that people do when they're actually replacing their own screens at home is actually cutting these ribbon cables on the chassis here, so just be really careful feeding it through. So if you feed the cables through first, I'll flip this over so you can see. They all want to, you don't want to get them hung up on that chassis through there. So this is now making contact with the chassis, and those three cables are all together in the correct length and none of them are hung up on that chassis at all. It's really easy to get that one caught. The screen is actually sat back in place. Be really careful with the cheap screens. Sometimes you've actually got to bend the little tags on the sides to get them in. That's why I always tend to use Amazon. It tends to be a better place to buy them. So now it's just a reversal of how we took it to pieces. So I'm going to start putting the screws down the sides with the washers on first. And it really helps if you've got a screwdriver that's slightly magnetised. So I'm not over tightening them yet until I get them all in place, and then I'll just double check that that LCD is seated properly. So once you've got those 6 side screws in, just go around and double check that it is seated nice and flush with the chassis. And if it is, then you can go in there and give them a little quarter of a turn. You don't want to over tighten them because they're actually easy to snap. So now we put the fillet screws in all 4 corners. And again, don't over tighten these either. And once the screws are back in place on the sides, we can put the vibrate back in place, and the contacts here line up with this little box here, so it makes it real easy. So you line that up with a little box and the little tag there with the screw. So now we want to put the motherboard back in place. We want to make sure that the LCD ribbon cables are sat in this recess here of the chassis and they bend back on themselves, so that bit goes underneath the motherboard and these come over the top. So feed it in from the side, make sure all your ribbon cables are lying where they should lie. Really careful not to cut any of those ribbon cables. And we just do a little test. The ribbon cables themselves, if they're incorrectly, should just lie when you bend them over, directly over the connectors themselves. So we're fine. So now we've got the motherboard sitting in the correct position, I'm going to go ahead and start adding the screws back. I'm going to start with the riser screw, that's the flathead screw. I'll put this screw in next, which goes through this little metal bracket. So, and then if you pop this high rose connector down, that's the Wi-Fi antenna. Get it lined over the top. Don't force it because they're actually extremely fragile. These high rose connectors are only rated for 50 insertions anyway. so they're not made to last. So now we put our little metal bracket in place that goes over the top of that high rose connector. It can be fiddly, but just take your time, you don't force anything. And then we can put the screw in that holds, the phillip screw that holds that into place. Now we're going to add the rear facing camera back into position. Click the connector down, reconnect these side connectors for the side switches. And then the LCD and digitizer cables can be connected up. So once we've got the ribbon cables connected up and back in place, we can put this shield back as well as the 4 Phillips screws that hold it down in place. And also remember about this hook that needs to hook down underneath the motherboard itself. It won't sit flush if that hook isn't back in its correct place. Just double check that it's all nice and flush. It should not be bent. So now we'll move down to the bottom part of the iPhone and put the speaker assembly back into place. It's got some little tabs that may need a little bit of help. And I'm going to put this Phillips screw in first because the one on the opposite side has got a little plastic riser. So this one's got this little plastic wedge shape riser to it. And now that we've screwed the speaker assembly down, we need to put the second flathead screw, the riser screw, in place in this corner. Now we're going to connect this high rose cable back up again. It feeds through under that clip, and you click that down in place. So now it's time to replace the battery, and there should be enough stickiness left on that double-sided tape. You don't have to add any more. And just before we actually screw down the battery connector, we need this little metal tab to go back in place, which stops the high rose connector from popping out. And then finally it's this long ribbon cable here can go back down. Click that into place, and then we can put this final bracket to hold that ribbon cable down on that connector. So it's a good idea to give the edges a bit of a clean on this back cover. Simply put in place and then slide back down. So I hope you found that useful. If you did, please, as always, give it a thumbs up. And any comments or questions, drop them below and I'll do my best to answer them. And hopefully I'll see you on the next video.